The day I flipped the main breaker and sent the entire Oakmeadow Hills subdivision into blackout silence. I was barefoot on my back porch, sipping coffee and watching the HOA president scream into her phone across the street. Her name was Beverly Bradshaw, 50-something, bleach blonde, shoulder pads and all, and she'd made it her personal mission to ruin my life ever since I moved in. I'm Yannick Preston. I'm not the type to look for trouble, but I don't run from it either. I'm a retired electrical contractor, which made what happened next all the more ironic. 3 months ago, I installed solar panels on my roof. No one in Oakmeadow Hills had them, but the bylaws didn't explicitly say I couldn't. I double-checked. Hell, I triple-checked. Beverly still showed up the next day in her golf cart like she was riding into battle. "You're violating community aesthetics," she barked while standing in my driveway, arms folded like a prison warden. "Those things are an eyesore. The board has voted unanimously to have them removed." "You can't vote on something that's not against the rules," I said, calm as ever. "And even if you could, I installed them legally." Beverly's nostrils flared so wide I thought she might take flight. "Then the rules will be updated retroactively. Starting now," I laughed. "That's not how laws work, Beverly." She stormed off, but the war had begun. Over the next few weeks, I started getting letters, every one of them clearly written by Beverly herself. First, it was unauthorized exterior modifications. Then, reflective surface hazard. Then, violating neighborhood energy uniformity. That one made me laugh for an hour. I ignored them. Then came the fine, $200 per day until the panels were removed. She wasn't bluffing. But here's where Beverly made her fatal mistake. See, Oakmeadow Hills was built 15 years ago, and I was one of the first contractors hired when the land was sold off. I helped install power infrastructure for the entire north end of the subdivision, underground lines, junctions, the whole deal. The utility company never bought the land under the lines. No one did. I did. I bought the easement rights legally for dirt cheap before I left the company and moved out of state. I figured one day I might live here. Funny how that worked out. So when Beverly and her HOA board pushed through an emergency bylaw banning solar panels retroactively and threatened to place a lien on my home, I filed a cease and desist. They ignored it. Then I gave them one last warning. I walked into the next HOA meeting, stood in front of everyone and said, "If you don't back off, I'll shut off your power. I own the lines under the north side of Oakmeadow Hills, all of them." Beverly looked at me like I just claimed to own the moon. "That's ridiculous," she scoffed. "You can't just shut off an entire neighborhood. You wouldn't dare." I dared. The blackout hit at exactly 4:57 p.m. on a Thursday. It wasn't an accident. That was peak time for the HOA board's weekly video call, the one they conducted from their overpriced home offices, stacked with little brass eagles and framed certificates that didn't mean a thing. I kept it surgical. Just the north grid, the section I had legal ownership over. 37 homes, including Beverly's. My breaker room is wired tighter than a military bunker. I flipped 3 switches, waited 15 seconds, and watched the lights across the street flicker out like a row of dying fireflies. Then came the silence. No air conditioners, no TVs, no Wi-Fi. Just birds and wind and the sound of Beverly's voice rising in pitch as she opened her front door and realized something was very, very wrong. I stayed put, didn't rush out. Let the panic simmer. Less than 2 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Councilman Jared Reese standing there, necktie askew, holding his phone like it had betrayed him. He wasn't part of the HOA, but he lived 3 houses down and liked to pretend he had more influence than he did. This wasn't the first time he'd tried to mediate. It was, however, the first time he looked genuinely rattled. "Yannick," he said, voice low. What the hell did you do?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Exercised my property rights. You can't just shut down the grid." "Actually, I can. I own the easement." "The HOA's been trespassing on my privately held utility corridor for 3 months. I have the deed." He blinked. "I thought that was just a bluff." Then you were mistaken. Behind him, Beverly emerged from her garage, dragging a gas generator like it was a wounded animal. She saw us and shouted across the lawn, "You're finished. This is a federal offense. I'm calling the governor." I didn't even look at her. I turned back to Jared. "You know what's funny? I gave them multiple chances, sent every legal document certified, gave them deadlines, warnings. They ignored all of it. She says you're threatening the safety of the community." I stepped inside and returned with a thick binder. Here, every letter, every timestamp, every refusal to comply, including the lien notice they tried to sneak through the county clerk's office last week. That's wire fraud, by the way, filing a lien without legal cause using forged documentation. Jared flipped through the pages, eyes widening. "This can't be real." "It is. I had it notarized." His tone changed. "You need to bring this to the city attorney." "I already did. He's reviewing it." I was told to document everything while they prepare an injunction. Beverly was now yelling into a disconnected cordless phone, clearly unaware it needed Wi-Fi to function. Her husband, Rick, carried a cooler full of meat from their dead freezer and stood in the driveway like he wasn't sure where to go. An hour later, a police cruiser rolled up. Officer Melanie Cruz stepped out, looking unimpressed. She was the only officer who actually lived in the area, and she knew all the players. "Yannick," she said as she approached, "I'm going to need you to walk me through this." I handed her the same binder. "I own the utility easement. The HOA has been using it without authorization, and when I tried to assert my rights, they responded by attempting to financially sabotage me." She flipped through the pages. "This is a lot. It's all documented. Did you notify the utility company before cutting the line?" "I didn't cut anything. I flipped the access breakers, my lines, my equipment. I even notified Public Works last week. Got the receipt. They inspected it and confirmed jurisdiction lies with the private owner." At that moment, Beverly stormed over. Her heels clicked on the pavement like they were trying to drill holes through it. "This man is endangering lives," she shouted. "He's shutting off medical equipment. He's interfering with critical infrastructure." Melanie didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation proving that?" "I don't need documentation. I'm the HOA president." Melanie raised an eyebrow. "Then you should know better than to speak without evidence." "I demand he be arrested." I spoke before Melanie could. "You might want to be careful with that demand, because if you push this, I'll take it further. That lien you filed, I have proof it was forged. The county's cybersecurity division traced the IP address to your assistant's home network. That's a felony." Beverly went pale. Melanie closed the binder. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm filing an incident report. I'll include the documentation and forward it to the city attorney's office. In the meantime, Yannick, you're within your rights to manage your own infrastructure. But I recommend you give the neighborhood a timeline for restoration." I nodded. "I'll reconnect the grid by noon tomorrow." That gives the HOA board enough time to decide whether they want to negotiate or keep pretending they're above the law. Melanie walked back to her cruiser. Beverly stood frozen, lips parted, eyes darting. For the first time, she didn't have anything to say. That night, I set up a temporary generator for my immediate neighbors, people who had nothing to do with the board's nonsense. I handed out extension cords and coolers. I even helped an elderly couple down the street move their refrigerated medication to my garage. By morning, 4 board members had resigned. At 10:30, I got a call from a local reporter. Someone had leaked the story. It was on the evening news by 5. The headline: Homeowner shuts down HOA after solar panel dispute turns ugly. The next day, I received a certified letter from the county clerk's office. The lien had been invalidated. The signature on the filing didn't match any licensed notary in the state. An investigation had been opened. At noon, I restored power. But I didn't forget, and neither did the rest of the neighborhood. By Monday morning, the smell of desperation clung to the HOA office like mildew. The building, converted from an old model home, sat at the corner of the subdivision. flanked by 2 empty flagpoles and a parking lot that no one had swept in weeks. I parked across the street and waited. Someone had slipped a note under my door at dawn, folded in half and sealed with a yellow post-it that simply read, "You need to see this. D." Inside the envelope were 5 printed emails, not screenshots, actual message logs, complete with timestamps and internal routing headers. I recognized one of the names instantly, Rory Delman, Oak Meadow's treasurer. The others were unfamiliar, but all of them ended in at oakmeadowhillsassock.com. The contents made my stomach clench. They weren't just trying to punish me with fines. The board had knowingly submitted false maintenance invoices to the HOA's reserve fund, tens of thousands billed for groundskeeping audits and safety inspections that never happened. And worse, one thread mentioned a reimbursement of $8,000 routed to a company called Sunridge Environmental for panel removal logistics. Sunridge didn't exist. I checked. I called my attorney, Ava Lemia, before I even left my truck. She picked up on the second ring. "Yannick," she said, already sounding alert, "please tell me this isn't another blackout." "Worse," I said. "The HOA's been laundering money. I've got hard proof." She was quiet for a beat. "How much?" "Enough to audit the whole board. Bring it in." Today, at her office, she scanned the emails twice, lips tightening as she read. "This is enough to trigger a forensic audit. If these were sent through official HOA servers, there's a trail. They used HOA accounts, internal addresses, then they're done." Financial fraud involving community dues falls under state jurisdiction. We'll need to file with the District Financial Crimes Bureau. Should I notify the other homeowners? Not yet. Let's get the paper chain secured first. If we move too early, someone might try to destroy records. That afternoon, Ava filed a formal complaint with the DFCS. By Thursday, subpoenas began landing like bricks on the porches of every board member. The agency didn't send agents in suits. They sent forensic accountants with rolling carts full of scanners. Meanwhile, I made copies of everything. I turned my garage into a war room, folding tables, labeled binders, and a corkboard connecting board members to vendor payments that didn't exist. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was gutting the whole rotten foundation. The first break came from a guy named Clay Garrison. He lived 2 streets over and worked nights as a hospital janitor. I'd seen him around, always quiet, always polite. He showed up at my door with a flash drive. "I used to do website admin stuff freelance," he said, eyes darting behind him like someone might be listening. "They hired me last year to optimize the HOA portal. But they also gave me access to the financial backend, said they needed someone to clean up the clutter." "Did you?" I asked, waving him inside. "I made backups first," he said, holding up the drive. "Didn't trust them. They were deleting things." Whole entries. On the drive were 9 months of financial records, some with metadata indicating they'd been altered after submission. One payment labeled Community Beautification $12,400 had originally been titled Legal Retainer Solar Panel Dispute. Someone had scrubbed it. Ava's eyes lit up when I brought it in. "This is tampering, not just fraud. They used community money to fund legal harassment against you and then tried to hide it." The DFCS moved quickly. By week's end, they froze the HOA's accounts. Rory Delman was brought in for questioning. He didn't last 5 minutes. According to the investigators, he folded faster than a beach chair in a hurricane. Named names, provided passwords. Confirmed that Beverly had authorized every reimbursement and even pushed for the lien against me as a deterrent to future infractions. But the most damning revelation came from an email buried 4 months deep. Subject line: Phase 2. It outlined a plan to secure a private deal with a local developer to annex 4 vacant lots at the edge of the subdivision lots that were technically communal green space. The HOA board intended to rezone them as utility corridors, then sell them off under the table and pocket the difference over $120,000. That wasn't just fraud. That was theft of community property. The city attorney's office issued warrants. Beverly was arrested the following Tuesday, wearing oversized sunglasses and a ridiculous cape coat like she was heading to a red carpet instead of the backseat of a squad car. Her husband, Rick, shouted something about political persecution. As officers walked her past the hedges she'd once fined a neighbor for trimming unevenly. By Friday, the neighborhood mailboxes were stuffed with official notices. The HOA board was formally dissolved pending investigation. A temporary oversight committee appointed by the city would manage operations until the next election cycle. I didn't run for office. I didn't need to. The community rallied on its own. A group of residents formed a neighborhood coalition, not a formal HOA, just a panel to represent concerns and keep things transparent. Clay joined. So did a retired school principal named Martha who used to get fined for having potted plants on her porch steps. Ava helped them draft a charter: no fines without mediation, no architectural restrictions without public hearings, and most importantly, no financial decisions without full resident access to the books. As for me, I finally got to finish installing the last 2 solar panels. With Beverly gone and the board disbanded, no one objected. In fact, 3 neighbors asked if I could recommend an installer. "I can give you a discount," I said, "if you help me put them up." The neighborhood transformed over the next few months. Without the board breathing down everyone's neck, people started talking to each other again. That rusted swing set that had been flagged for removal, repainted and repaired by volunteers. The cracked sidewalk that Beverly claimed wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. Fixed by a group of retired handymen who'd lived on the same street for 20 years. One evening, Clay and I stood near the edge of the subdivision where the green lots had nearly been sold. "Funny," he said, "how close they got to pulling it off." "Not that close," I replied. "They underestimated how much people pay attention when you threaten their homes." He nodded. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't owned those lines?" I looked toward the row of panels catching the last of the sun. "Then I would have found something else." You don't let people like that run unchecked, not when they think their little titles give them power. He didn't say anything after that, just stood there watching the wind move through the trees. The subdivision held elections 6 months later. No one ran unopposed. Every candidate stood on a platform of transparency, accountability, and rebuilding trust. The ballot turnout was the highest in Oak Meadow history. And when the results were announced, the new chair of the neighborhood coalition gave a speech on the community lawn. No golf carts, no shoulder pads. Just a clipboard, a microphone, and a promise: no more secrets, no more threats. If you've got panels, plant boxes, or wind chimes, we won't fine you, we'll ask where you got them. Everyone laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like a neighborhood again. I arrived at the courthouse just before 9 in the morning, the binder clutched in my hand, already starting to fray at the edges from weeks of use. Ava met me on the steps, her coat buttoned all the way despite the spring heat. She didn't say anything right away, just gave me a look that said everything was about to shift. We walked through security and into the hearing room on the 3rd floor, where the state's Financial Crimes Division was presenting their findings to a judge in chambers. The room was quiet, sterile, and packed tighter than a freight elevator. I spotted 3 former board members seated together, none of them making eye contact with each other. Beverly wasn't there. She'd posted bail a week ago and immediately retained a defense attorney who looked like he charged by the syllable. The presiding judge, Marlene Roth, entered without ceremony. She was deliberate in her movements, glasses sliding halfway down her nose as she adjusted her seat at the bench. She didn't waste time. The matter before us today concerns allegations of financial misconduct, document falsification, and unlawful use of community funds by members of the Oak Meadow Hills Homeowners Association, she said, her voice as dry as sandpaper. "I've reviewed the documentation provided. I'll now hear statements from the complainant." Ava stood. Your Honor, the evidence we've submitted includes email records, transaction logs, and sworn affidavits from both current and former residents. These records show that the defendants manipulated HOA finances to fund personal legal actions, submitted falsified invoices for services never rendered, and attempted to initiate the illegal sale of protected green space. Judge Roth raised an eyebrow. All of this occurred without resident knowledge or approval? Yes, Your Honor, Ava said, and in direct violation of both the HOA's charter and state housing statutes. The defense attorney Reagan Maris, a man with a tan that looked painted on rose next. My clients maintain that all actions taken were in line with their fiduciary responsibilities. They contend that the financial decisions made were necessary for the long-term benefit of the community. Judge Roth interrupted, including the attempt to sell land registered as communal open space. That sale was never finalized, he said, tugging at his cuffs. It was under consideration only. And the forged invoice entries, he paused, a misunderstanding between the treasurer and the contracted services. Judge Roth exhaled slowly. A misunderstanding with 8 separate shell companies, all traced back to a P.O. box registered under the treasurer's maiden name. No one said anything. A bailiff shifted in the corner. Rory Delman, sitting 3 seats from the end, stared at the table like it owed him money. One of the other former board members, Ethan Harper, the secretary, was visibly sweating through his collar. He looked like he might be sick. The judge turned to the prosecutors. I'm authorizing a full forensic audit of Oak Meadow Hills HOA financial activities for the past 5 years. All related bank accounts are to remain frozen. Furthermore, all parties involved in the attempted illicit sale of protected green space will be subject to criminal review under the State Housing Integrity Act. Reagan tried to object, but the judge cut him off. I'm not done. As for the forged lien filed against Mr. Preston's home, I find substantial cause to pursue criminal charges for fraudulent record submission and attempted property coercion. That matter will be referred to the district attorney's office. That was the moment I realized it was really happening. Not just a slap on the wrist, not a quiet resignation or some watered-down apology. Real consequences. For every fake invoice, every intimidation tactic, every time Beverly had looked me in the eye and treated me like I was the problem. The hearing adjourned less than an hour later. Outside, Ava leaned against the stone railing and dialed someone on her cell, murmuring about next steps and court dates. I stood nearby, watching a group of local reporters gather on the sidewalk. "Do you want to say anything on record?" one of them asked, a woman in a dark blouse with a press badge clipped to her collar. I hesitated, then shook my head. "I'll let the facts speak for themselves." She nodded, scribbled something into her notebook, and walked off. That afternoon, the Temporary Oversight Committee held its first open meeting in the community park. Folding chairs were arranged in rows under the pavilion, and everyone was filled. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years sat side by side. Some brought printouts, others brought coffee. A few brought lawn chairs and refused to sit in the official ones out of principle. Clay stood up first and addressed the crowd. "From here on out," he said, holding the microphone like it weighed more than it should, "every decision made about this neighborhood will be voted on by you. No backroom meetings, no unexplained charges, and no more silence." Martha followed, reading out the interim charter in full. It wasn't flashy, it didn't need to be. It just guaranteed transparency, equal say, and the right to challenge any decision made on behalf of the community. When they finished, someone in the back clapped, then another. Within seconds, the whole pavilion was echoing with applause, not the kind you give because you're supposed to, but the kind that comes from knowing something broken is finally being rebuilt. Later that evening, I found a letter taped to my front door. Not typed, handwritten, just 2 lines. "You were right. We got greedy. I'll be gone soon. I hope you get peace from all this." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. The handwriting was Beverly's. I left the note where it was. The wind took it by morning. Weeks passed. The audits continued, but the community didn't stall. We held gardening days, fixed fences, and repainted the old mural at the entrance with kids from the local elementary school. Someone even built a little lending library next to the park bench that Beverly once declared unsanctioned. Ava visited once, just to see the place. She stood on my porch, sipping iced tea out of a mason jar and watching the neighborhood buzz like a beehive. "You ever think about what you would have done if the solar panel thing never happened?" she asked. "Probably kept to myself," I said. "Let them push people around and stayed out of it. You regret it." "Not a single minute." She nodded, then pointed to the panels on my roof. "You know, those are going to start saving you real money soon." "They already have," I said, "in more ways than one." Not long after, I helped Martha and Clay organize the first community project under the new charter, converting the abandoned HOA office into a shared workspace and tool library. We stripped out the old carpet, tore down the fake wood paneling, and painted the walls a bright, ridiculous shade of green that no one could agree on, but that everyone seemed to love. On the door, we hung a sign carved by one of the neighborhood kids in shop class. It read, "Our house now," and it was. No one ever asked me to take the solar panels down again. In fact, by summer's end, 6 more homes had them installed and not a single fine was issued. The power lines underneath Oakmeadow Hills still belong to me, but I never had to flip those breakers again. Because now, when someone has a problem, they knock on a door, not file a complaint. When there's a disagreement, it's settled over coffee, not threats. And when someone forgets what this place is supposed to be, there's an entire neighborhood ready to remind them, not with rules, but with each